I had so much fun talking to you for your wonderful podcast, Women Seeking Wholeness, that I had to have you back on. And we happened to share some moments with this idea of anger, right? And like and aggression. I shared with you my paintings of my ferocious
Oh,
beast women.
amazing.
And you had some thoughts about anger, which I was like excited to talk to you about. So that, dear listener, is the reason why Cherie and I are here
Whoa. Well,
today.
I just feel
Because
like you were one of my favorite guests. I just thought we commit,
oh,
like, we're just like boom, 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 boom. Like, I feel like I get you.
yeah, that's why I shared my paintings with you. I'm not like everybody. Like, here, look at these. um, but you. So first, I just want people to know you a little bit about you, and you have like an amazing story with so many twists and turns and plot leaps that there's a lot there. But you tell us about why you created the podcast, Women Seeking Wholeness. I think that might be a good place to start.
Yeah. So I thought I would like be a journalist someday.
Mhm.
Like I thought that was a career path I wanted to explore, but I loved psychology more, so I actually chose psychology. But I'm a Gemini moon, which may not mean anything to the vast majority of your listeners, but
Shh,
I
it's going
love
right over my head.
so I didn't know, I didn't put it together till 2 years ago. Oh, it's because I'm a Gemini moon. But anyway, I just love to talk. And it so happened that in late 2018, I hit a major, the only thing that I can say is I started questioning everything in my life. And uh, so for my fifth, I started it right after my 50th birthday in 2019.
Mm.
And I just was like, if I don't get this out, I'm going to implode. If I don't talk and therapize, like if I can't bounce what I'm feeling off of, these amazing people that I hunted down to interview, if I can't do that, I'm going to be really sick. So that's just my way. And I've been a public speaker and all those things and run a business and spoken on stages. So I don't have a fear of just talking. It's the way that I move energy through my body. So a podcast just felt like, well, I might as well take everybody along with me on this journey of not knowing and questioning and crisis and trauma release.
Mhm. And you write about that was like the the sort of normal channels of healing, they weren't working for you and your family.
Exactly.
That it wasn't actually bringing you the release, the healing, and the stuff that you needed.
Yeah, it was actually creating more harm and more complex trauma. So we kind of all awakened together as a family, like my older children that are in their 20s. We kind of all just awakened together to that was my husband coming through the door. He has no idea I'm on a podcast. Um, just like, hey, what is really happening here? Why are we not healing certain things? Why are we not really breaking these family patterns? And how do we feel? I raised my kids to be truth seekers, and they are ultimately the ones who brought inquiry into my space of what about this, mom, and what about this that you raised me and taught me, and what about this? And at first I had that resistance and that cognitive dissonance, and then finally I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to deeply listen. And it was that was just bringing me inside. It's like, wow, how does that feel in me? How? And then I began my own very private wrestle. um, if people just saw me in public or listen to my podcast, and then my husband and I were separating, it was the whole thing. 20, after 25 years of marriage, and it was like I held it together just enough to run my business, take care of my kids. It was really messy. But if you were to just see me, this is why everything you see online is like, right? Because I
Mm.
probably looked like I had a measure of myself put together. And I did the bare minimums. The rest of the time, I was in the deep void of that inquiry process and surrendering. and it was super powerful, but it was dark. It was hard, but also necessary, because that descent process, I believe, is a rite of passage into your soul path.
Mhm.
Most people will not question their programming. You could say their indoctrination, on not
Mhm.
just in a religious context, but in multiple arenas. And I decided, I mean, I'm a Jungian psychologist. That's how I lean. And it's like, oh, gee, Carl Jung really knew that you have to go into the shadows in order to really, really know who you are. And that was uber painful, like suffering level questioning and gut, like, who am I?
And none of
Who
us want to
actually
do
am
that.
I?
Oh.
Yeah. Midlife
Yeah.
crisis. I don't know what you want to call it.
No, no, I feel you. I mean, I have thoughts about that now. Like, I'm 44 and I have some thoughts about that are completely, but I love I mean, that idea. I mean, for me that brings up, that descent. You mentioned that, like, for me that brings up the idea of like no mud, no lotus. And we're so, which is
Mm.
what my teacher Thich Nhat Hanh says, no mud, no lotus. And that's such a
Oh, I love
powerful
that.
thing, right? Like you need that muck, you need the poop, the rotten vegetables, and all
Well,
that
and
stuff
the, like,
for the flower to
just the
bloom.
caterpillar soup, right? For the butterfly to metamorphosize.
Yeah.
It's the same
Yeah.
concept.
Yeah, but we naturally avoid that. We don't want that, right? And we, and you mentioned also questioning our programming. I mean, that's all like scary stuff, and we're told like keep busy, you know.
It'll all work out. God will work it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And you were raised Mormon, right? You write that you were a seventh
It's either
generation.
seventh or eighth. I need to go back and look at my genealogy, but let's just say the very, very beginnings. Some of my ancestors were, one particular ancestor was friends with Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism. Yes, the prophet.
Wow. Wow, wow. So your family was very deeply involved, embedded, and etc. And that produced some trauma that you had to heal from, I imagine,
Well, I mean,
in
I'm
some
sort of
ways. Or
integrating.
are
Yeah,
you I mean, I'm making a huge assumption there, which
no,
I apologize for, but like
no.
are you are you still Mormon?
So you cannot take the Mormon out of me.
Mhm.
It would be just like telling somebody who was raised Orthodox Jew, like, you're not Jewish.
Mhm. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
that
yeah. It's like
level
a
of, like,
cultural
familial. Yeah, exactly. And I live
embedded.
in Utah, and a lot of my family members. So I haven't, like, left the church, because that's a phraseology that's just passed around. Like, have you left the church? And a lot
Mm.
of people are just like, where's she at? And I don't like to put myself in a box of being in or out or this or that. But I will say that, part of what put me in fetal position when I was,
Mhm.
turning 50 and that whole time, was this, researching and asking and questioning everything that my first 7 years, your first 7 years of life, you're highly programmable. Like,
Mhm.
most adults, most young adults, well, I just say by age 30, all you are is walking around with programs and patterns that you've been handed.
Mhm.
So it isn't until later in life that you actually go, wait, I'm not, all this dissonance is happening in you. And for me, it was, I love the church. I love the people. I love how I was raised in certain aspects of it. Mormons aren't supposed to drink, or even, but there's weird things like don't drink coffee and tea, but, like, you don't question that either because it came from the prophet. There's just a lot that, but for me, the smoking gun, from the time I was a little girl and I heard the word polygamy. So
Mhm.
early Mormon prophets and priesthood holder men, they practiced polygamy, which is, marrying more than one woman. Not only did they marry more than one, like dozens. So Joseph Smith had, it's estimated, over 30 wives. Brigham Young, the next prophet, over 55 wives. And it just never sat right with me. It, in my feminine body, as a
Mhm.
9-year old, I remember I have a distinct memory of being told about it. And I felt sick. I felt like somebody punched me, and that never left me. And I kept being told God will work it out. That's why I was referencing that before. But
Mhm.
like I just try to accept it on faith because, you know, I love the church and I love the things and the people and the tribe and the community. And there's so many beautiful things. That was just one huge smoking gun and red flag that I could never reconcile within myself, that I was always asking God and going and feeling really diminished as a woman
Yeah, I
in my
guess.
eternal identity. That just never made sense.
Yeah, if you're one of like, if you're, you're the idea that all these people in your culture hold you as like one of many that can be almost like interchangeable or something, like this a sense of
Right.
like, I guess just your essential importance in some ways. You know what I mean? Like that's diminished, right? Like, and then the man's
Sure.
role is like of importance is really held up. Like obviously, like the men are
Yeah.
in first place, the
He's
women
the
are in
central
second, third,
figure.
fourth, and fifth. 50th place.
Yes, well, it's like here's this priesthood man or this prophet, and he is the central eternal figure, and all of the women evolve, revolve like planets around this central figure, and they're silent and they don't have authority, at least in ministerial offices or priesthood, the ability, let's just say, to heal or anything official to act in the
Mm,
name of God. Women do not have the authority to do that.
mm,
So a lot of women in Utah, let's just say, and a lot of Mormon women, they want that. They want to have some power. They want to heal and help people, but because they aren't able to do that at church necessarily. I mean, you can hold positions and as a teacher, but you never lead men. You never lead men.
mm.
You only lead other women and children, and even then, a priesthood holder presides over you as you do so, even in the home. So for me, it was like I started to see, like in the late 90s, early 2000s in Utah where I live, a lot of LDS or Mormon women would go out and learn healing arts like Reiki or EFT or just all these things so that they could feel that they had something hands on, if you will, a modality that would give them the ability and the fulfillment, if you will, and the purpose that they wanted to fulfill to help humanity. Um, Mormon theology is very specific in its handbooks of ministration that only male priesthood holders have, and I think they even said medical doctors, the right to heal someone. That it should only be a male priesthood holder that has the authority. And it's like, well, there's billions of people on the earth, and there's probably only, I don't know, I'm guessing conservatively, maybe 500,000 active, righteous Melchizedek priesthood holding men in the Mormon church because their numbers are dwindling a bit. Um, that have how is that gonna how are we gonna
Yeah.
heal the world?
Yeah, that doesn't that's logically impossible. But I would find that infuriating. I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess for
Well, let me just tell
myself,
you,
like,
like,
yeah.
yeah. Well, I was mad. I'm a feisty person, but I'm also a nice, soft person, and so I would just smile,
Mm,
and inside I'm
mm,
like seething, right?
mhm,
All these health issues started to develop, and I could see the injustice because
mm.
I run retweets. I run retreats for women. I have for many years, and I could see these women coming to me who are super depressed. Utah leads the nation in antidepressant usage.
Mm.
Um, and I actually lost a sister to suicide. That's a whole other story. In 2005, she left behind 5 children.
Oh
At the time, I
gosh.
didn't put
So
a lot of these
sorry.
pieces together, but she was very espoused and deep in the dogma aspects of their religion because of her mental illness. I think she had a hard time, seeing herself as worthy, which many of us do anyway. Take religion out of
Mhm.
it, we still see ourselves as unworthy. But the last 2 years of her journal, even though she was outwardly doing all the church things, when we got a hold of her journals for 2 years, she just stopped praying because she didn't feel worthy. And
Ugh.
she wasn't doing anything major. She did have a painkiller addiction, but she went into treatment for it. And then that's ultimately how she took her life. She didn't overdose or relapse on her drug addiction, her prescription drug addiction. She took a drug that was used to manage her bipolar called Seroquel, and she overdosed on that. Um, so part of my
Mm.
unraveling, to be honest with you, Hunter, and my questioning and my deep grief, unprocessed grief around these kinds of things, because I also lost an aunt to suicide. With my sister Shauna, it was like, oh my goodness, how many other women? My sister is like the poster child of like the extreme end of the spectrum of this. but how many other Mormon women, and I know this because I self-published a book. I talked to Utah sociologists. I was on the board of NAMI. I was on the State Suicide Prevention Council. The Utah Attorney General asked me to be on it. Like, I could see it, that all of this perfectionism, unworthiness cycle,
Mhm.
um, women not allowed to be angry or advocate for their own rights and authority. I could see how that diminishment of personal power was contributing to depression. And I didn't dare, like, I may have written it in my journal, but I didn't dare outwardly speak of it because I wanted to stay faithful. I wanted to stay, I'm a devote by nature. I'm a very devoted person to God. But I also know, what kind of woke me up to the fierceness of my feminine power with this is when I attached to learning about the divine feminine, mother, mother God, goddess history that has been excised from Christian theology, the Gnostic texts, Mary Magdalene. These are the things that were contributors to my awakening. And I could
Mm.
see how this was completely absent in my church of origin, as it is in most, as it
Yeah.
is in most. And it just gave rise to this, like, again, like I told you, why'd you start your podcast? Well, I would implode. I would have like I had to talk about these things in a
Y-
respectful way, albeit sometimes what comes out of me does not sound very conscious. But I'm not about fighting from a place of unwarranted anger, because fighting doesn't change anything. Inviting and collaborating, that's what's going to lead to our evolution.
Yeah. Yeah. And opening up these stories and the awareness of like these policies or these, these habits, these traditions, they have effects, right? Like they have consequences. They have incredibly hard consequences in people's lives. That's heartbreaking. It's so
Yeah.
interesting, Cherie, because I was like brought up in this such a different upbringing, like agnostic, like my hippie parents were super irreverent. Like I was like little punky Brewster kid, just like full of my own empowerment, you know? And it's something I've really discovered as just kind of I think for me it was like kind of a shock to realize like, oh, the world is not like this. Like women aren't equal in the world. Like this is like
Yeah.
what I thought things were is not what they were, and it was this kind of shock to me, and to see how many how many women I encounter all the time who have that deep thread of feeling unworthy. That for my parents,
Yes.
they've got incredible like good seeds they passed on, and some incredible flaws they passed on as because they're human, and
Sure.
and sometimes I just want to say this to the listener, because sometimes I talk about my father's anger and how that was passed on to me, but I want to say he also passed on to me this deep sense of like, of empowerment. That at least when I was little,
Yeah.
he kind of pushed back against that empowerment as it came out as a teenager, but a deep sense of empowerment, and seeing that so many in the world don't have this. Oh, I'm so sorry about your sister. I'm
Thank
so sorry
you.
about that suffering, and that because you knew her value. You know what I mean? Like if you could have only given that
Oh,
sense
yeah.
of her value, and if you could just give that to
It was
somebody
just a
else.
wall. I couldn't get, in fact, to
It's
me,
a
this is crazy, but yesterday I found a letter that I wrote to her 6 months before she took her life,
uh,
begging her
uh,
to stay, telling her how much she was loved, like how talented she was, super talented, musically, everything, super loving. Um, and that was really, and I called my mom and read it to her over the phone. And because it's been, I don't know how many years, 17 years. It's been a while, but it's still hard. It still hurts. She's only 2 years younger than me. Our kids were best friends. Like they still are. Like it's very jolting to me that, I can't just pick up the phone and call her, that even after 17 years, and She had a very larger than life personality. And to be honest, I feel like she's urging me, because I am writing a book about my experiences and it's kind of memoir based, and about how I awakened to specifically the Magdalene, um, which is a whole archetype. She was a historical figure, but she's also an archetype for our day, which is divine co-creation, male, female, balanced, egalitarian leadership and authority. And so I feel like she would be all over this, right? My sister. It's what she needed to become empowered within our faith construct that was not there. And so I feel her urging me on. I feel her writing with me sometimes. And it's been so, like, writing this has been I can't even, like, it's been so therapeutic for me. And it's also been probably the hardest thing, because I'm climbing right back in
Mm.
to the trauma and the questions and living into the mystery of things. And hopefully when I get this done, it will feel like a love letter to the world via the lens also of my sister, what she would say now.
Mm. Wow. I think that's very brave.
Mm, thank you.
So this is all like ties in because like as women, like as you mentioned, like your upbringing, right? Like we were or at least you or I was encouraged to be feisty, and most of us were encouraged to be peacekeepers, right? To stay silent, to be good, to be kind, to be not to be gentle. And I
Yeah.
get, and I get that enormously, because that idea for me, like we mentioned in the beginning, like the paintings that I'll have to put one in the show notes, dear listener, but
Mhm.
they're just the idea of like aggression and anger that I dealt with is so frowned upon in our society, right? That it was like I had to paint my own therapy for this for like 6 years, right?
Mhm.
And to explore this, to like get to a place of, in some ways, acceptance of this. But you write about this anger as like a real righteous anger. Talk to me about this idea that we are not supposed to feel our anger and what this does to us.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things. So there's a phrase, righteous indignation, which I don't even really love the term righteous,
Mm,
but all that really means to me now is warranted.
hmm.
So, like Christ, when he changed over there were money changers in front of the temple, and it says in the New Testament that he basically got really ticked off, and he threw over the. You don't think of Christ, the pictures of Jesus are all like he's very docile and like powerful, but not that powerful or mad that he would do. But he was making a statement, flipping those tables over. And then he said, and he spoke out, "Make not my father's house a house of merchandise." Well, now I'm like, "Make not my mother's house,
Mm.
you know, a house of merchandise." And it's this idea that, I've spoken about this at length with sacred rage,
Mhm.
uh, where we have been bottling up, penting up these emotions that need to be expressed, and we're not giving ourselves permission until health crisis hits.
Mm.
And even then, we're going to the doctor and trying to drug it away or
Mhm.
mask it, when in fact it wants to be felt, it wants to be seen, it wants to be acknowledged. So when we're just sitting at church, with a happy face, we're not getting to the heart of polygamy. I'll just use Mormonism here as a reference for that.
Mhm.
We're not asking the questions of how it feels in our bodies. We're not getting into embodiment practices that allow us to access our own inner wisdom that might conflict with persisting or existing theology. So sacred rage to me is like, feel it,
Mm.
own it. This is what I was saying about the shadow work I was doing. I was finally gave myself permission after almost 5 decades of just bowing my head and basically saying, "Okay, well, I'll have faith."
Mm.
It was like my body was like, no, it's not working. for you. And I had a great upbringing. My parents are amazing. My mother is the most full of faith person I know. This is a different time.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm Generation X. My kids are millennials and Gen Zers, and they get it. They're leading us into this like really space of equality, validation, um, tolerance,
Yeah.
and basically leveling the playing field so that we're all in it together. And hierarchies don't like that. They don't like that.
No.
But your body. So to answer your question, this was all brewing in me, and I recognized I had thyroid issues.
Mm.
I had so many like Hashimoto's, all these things that I didn't link as pent up emotion and anger. And so as I started to feel these things and I started going into my own incubation, my own cocooning, my own deep inner work, and I did have guides and I did have people helping me, thank goodness, um, who were telling me, you're not crazy, Cherie, you're not crazy. It's like this is healthy. I'm like, well, it doesn't feel healthy. And it's like, well, this is what they want you to not do. And this is how they can come back and say, see, you've lost the spirit. You're deceived. Satan's got a hold of you.
Hmm.
And that is so damaging to someone who's truly, honestly questioning, to tell them that if they go into their shadows and they feel their feelings, that they're somehow on Satan's team. That's how black and white it can be for the dogma. So now I just give permission to women, children, and men, because the feminine in men is just as wounded, if not more, than the feminine in women. The whole consciousness is suffering with unexpressed emotion and bottling things up and not expressing healthy anger and not advocating for ourselves in ways that are healthy. So the cost is, you could smile through your whole life and you could be the most pleasant, Christ-like loving person, and you could never access the pieces of you that could lead to an absolutely powerful awakening to who you actually are with, let's just say, to use that same belief, Christ. To become at one with Christ means you go into the valley of the shadow of death. You merge with your darkness. You feel it. And you can give some of it over so you don't have to feel all of it. But at the same time, you become real, not fake. You become the opposite of fake when you do this
Mm.
work.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a whole revelation to me. When I got on the other side of it, I was like, oh my word, I feel so much lighter.
Mm.
I feel like all these burdens were just lifted off my back. I feel clearer. I feel
Yeah.
more love than I've ever felt for humanity. I'm not making it us and them anymore. I can feel all my feelings and not completely judge them. And I can still have bad days, but I mean, like, I'm just like, the awareness is there now.
You can feel more. Oh my God. I mean, like, that's the whole idea that you're supposed to just put a mask on. You're not supposed to have feelings. It's so crazy to me. Like, I mean, it's just bananas. I mean, if you listen to our episode, dear listener, with Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, the neuroscientist, she talks about how the human brain evolved and how we evolved to be a feeling organism. And we think,
Yes.
we think to help survive and protect ourselves, right? And to like we are feeling first and thinking second. And yeah, there should be an indignation. I mean, this is fascinating, this idea of like pent up anger leading to health issues, because I mean that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, maybe not in every case, in every health issue, dear listener, but the idea that like your anger is a physical energy in your body. It's like a real physical energy. It's cells
It's
moving. It's
yeah,
it's heat. It's tension. It's all
let's
that
use that
stuff,
word.
right? Yeah, like the
It's
tension, right? And
thermogenic. Yeah, it's a heated response. Literally, that's why women have evolved to having hot flashes in midlife, because we're so pissed off.
oof,
It's a
that
collective, like going back to Jungian stuff, like this is a
Mm-hmm.
collective issue. Even though you weren't raised with a religious dogma, or you weren't indoctrinated about you're not worthy or whatever to God, or whatever that is for, most people raised in varying religions, depending on their level of activity, like you still hold the collective that we're all holding, this wounding.
Well,
And
the idea of being second place, I mean, for any woman anywhere, right? Like that you are constantly in second place your whole life is so frustrating. Like that idea that you're acting like a girl, like you're too
yeah,
sensitive, you're bossy rather than have leadership potential, right? You
you're
are
shrewd, you're
you
shrill, yeah,
yeah, and your appearance is the most important thing, right? Like, I mean, that's deep in us, right? That's
yeah,
deep in so many of us, like that idea of, like losing our appearance and growing old and losing our value and all of that stuff. Like, yeah, we should be effing pissed off. Like, I mean, I think we should. There's
well,
there's
and
some
that
reasons to
that
be
is the
angry.
warrior. Yes. And that's where the inner warrior comes out. And she's like, okay, like I could stand before this is where I'm at right now. Like I could
Mm,
literally stand before anyone in any kind of hierarchical patriarchy, anything, and totally stand in what I know in my body and die for it. Like it's
mm,
that level of like knowing in me now. Like I'm not going to be intimidated. I'm not going to be told what I should or should not believe. There are many things that I still espouse that I was raised with religiously, and there's many things that I don't feel right about. I don't see them as healthy, policy wise or doctrine wise, and I reserve the right. It's my birthright as a child of the divine, a child of God, to to be able to do that and to have that direct connection. So historically speaking, and a lot of my research is focused on this, there's always been two camps in the
mhm,
world, of people on the spiritual path. And let's just even say religion.
mhm,
There's gnosis, Gnosis, no, which means knowing. So that's where you get the term
mhm,
Gnostic, and you use the term agnostic.
mm,
Means I don't know.
mhm,
We put such a negative connotation on it. Like, what do you actually, like, what do we actually know? No, 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 no. Right. So Gnostic though is I know what I know in my body right now. I know how I'm connected to my creator. I know that I have that right. Whereas the Orthodox is on the other camp going, well, no, there's a system to this. There are rules. You have to go through these other leaders and you have to do these rituals and you have to, and then maybe you might know. Then maybe you might have, you know, companionship of God's spirit with you, or however you want to call it. Then you might be worthy if you do all these things we tell you to do, and you pay tithes and you do all kinds of offerings and everything. Like in Mormonism, it's considered like what they call a high demand religion, which means we pay tithes, we devote, we covenant actually in sacred places to give everything, just about everything, to the building up of this,
Wait, you use
to
the
the
word
church.
we
Yeah,
covenant as in we covenant as a verb, and that's not like in my everyday vocabulary. I mean, I understand, but can you define it
promise.
for
Yeah,
I
we
have I have
promise.
some I have some question marks, so I'm sure there's a listener who does too. You promise. Okay.
Yeah, so it's just that they call it like a covenant path, and I understand it's
Yeah, yeah.
sacred.
Mhm.
From the time you're born all the way until you die, there's certain covenants and rituals you do. And I don't want to dismiss this for anyone that's on this path. I'm just saying some of it I held as sacred and took with me as beautiful. And
Mhm.
some of it I realized was very compulsory. It was uninformed consent. I didn't know what I was really getting into. I was so young.
Mhm.
Like I said, the first 7 years of my life, everything was laid out for me, right? And it was like it's like the equivalent of choosing your lifelong career by age 7 as you prepare to get baptized at age 8,
Mm.
because that's part of the path, that's part of the covenant path, to always do these things, and you keep affirming it every week through ordinance of sacrament. And so I went and I asked Mother, I asked my higher self, I asked God, help me go deeper with what's the higher way for me to be of service and to be of devotion without all the exteriors and the outwards. And I was taken right to that place in the New Testament where Christ said, the kingdom of God is within you. It doesn't
Mm.
come by observation. It's not out here. It's not something you can look at. It's not through a person, place, or thing, or a system, or an institution, or a set of ideologies. It's within you. The kingdom of God is in you. And I call it the queendom now, but all of that just came together for me as these deep wisdom teachings of gnosis. Christ was teaching wisdom teachings. He wasn't teaching the prevailing religious philosophies of his time. He was born into it, but he went out in the wilderness and did his thing and taught, out to the people of everyone. And so for me, it's like, yeah, I want to do that. I reserve the
Mhm.
right to do that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I appreciate that. I mean, and from I'm not no religious scholar, but from what I understand, I mean, all the various churches of the world, right? Like the various forms of Christianity and et cetera, like have, like, there's a lot of ritual, there's a lot of steps, there's a lot of like, uh, institution, right? And from what I've read from the teachings of Jesus, like it's kind of in a lot of ways anti-institutional. It's like feed the
Very
poor,
much
and
so.
he was also teaching to women. And you're right, you talked about like the Magdalene archetype for our day, and that was something I remember learning at some point years ago, that like, yeah, actually there was this was embedded in a patriarchal culture, right? Like a lot of the great religions of the world are embedded in a patriarchal culture. And so there's this teasing apart we have to understand and see, like how these cultures suppress women, but there are these beautiful wisdom pieces embedded, but embedded in passed down with the wisdom is all this like patriarchal suppression and culture. And so imagine that teasing that apart for yourself was a fascinating and rewarding and incredibly interesting journey. And I imagine you got some pushback. I imagine you got some
Yeah,
pushback in your
I would have
culture.
got, yeah, the hardest part is like disappointing my parents, you know. Um, and I, I was raised with, even though she maybe wouldn't identify as a feminist, my mother is definitely a feminist. She's always advocated for us to go out in the world and do things and not just be the typical like subservient housewife, if you will, or whatever. It's like, I can't wait to see what you guys create. I have, three sisters and three brothers. And uh, yeah, so really for me, it was unplugging from people pleasing. Because as women, that's
Mm,
what we are trained to do because we care so much. There's a whole matrix of unplugging from that is full of actual pain
oh.
to, and
Mhm.
it's still a process for me, like in saying that I'm not trying to people please, that doesn't mean that I don't want to serve people and help them and
Mhm.
love them. But there can be this shadow aspect to that where it's like I will put myself second, like you mentioned. I will continuously put myself second and second and second and second until my soul is like, girl, like this is not good for you. Wake up. So I know that there's a whole movement in Christianity of like being second to God. So I don't want to undermine that.
Mhm.
At the same time, I believe the divine wants us to be in full partnership, in shared authority. It's like Christ was trying to teach that, you know, better things that I've done, you can do kind of a thing. Like, I want you all to do this. I want you all to be, who you are. I want you to all recognize you are the I am.
Mm.
And for some reason, that's so threatening to our establishments to have a lot of people waking up to their own power, to own their voice, to give themselves permission to feel what they feel and question and, poke the traditions a little bit. That's so threatening. And that for me was one thing that let me know I was on the right track. Because
Mm.
if something is true and good and full of light, it should stand up to scrutiny. It should stand up to every question. It shouldn't evade it or shame the
Mm.
questioner. It should
Mm.
embrace and like, let me love you back into here's what we know and here's what we don't know versus you're defying doctrine. You're doing this, you're disappointing, you're going down Satan's path, whatever. And I'm in a couple of spaces where I just observe like ex-Mormons. I don't fully participate. I just look at what they're dealing with, and they are all full of, I shouldn't say all, that's a huge blanket statement, but the vast majority of them are suffering with this ostracization and shame, and they had to be true to themselves. They had to do what they felt was right in their soul. And they can't get through to any of their believing family and friends. And that's creating more and more trauma for them. And I
Mm.
don't see this just in Mormonism. Like, this is a pervasive issue of disappointing the norm, being a disruptor of the way we do things around here, if you will, and family systems, academia, religion, government. When you wake up and you're like the black sheep, it's usually the black sheep of the family is usually the one who's most awake. You
Mm-hmm.
just might be manifesting it in ways that aren't accepted by the culture, but
Mm-hmm.
usually the black sheep is the one that's like, I don't feel so good here. This is not my jam, but no one listens to them.
And it's toxic for them. I mean, I think about like my daughter who's gay and her friends who are, queer and non-binary and trans, and they're saying like this is toxic to me, this culture, right? Like they're the black sheep in the larger culture of saying like this is toxic to me,
Yes.
and that's so threatening. It's so threatening to the larger culture that change is happening so fast. I mean, I guess it's so threatening because it's like if you've bought in, so to speak, you know what I mean? Like if you're like I I'm submitting to what was said before, again and again and again throughout my life, it's that it goes back to that pain you talked about, that pain of being like, oh, uh,
There are
of
so many
questioning of,
harmful policies that have been put in place. And I'll just use the LGBTQ plus I don't know, the whole string of acronyms
yeah,
that it's like, it's like there's real pain there.
yeah,
And it's so dismissive of religious hierarchies and administrations to say, well, God said this and you're doing this, and therefore you can't really be with us. You can attend, but you can't really be a full participant. And you're going to be denied these blessings in the afterlife because you are choosing into this. Now we know through critical thinking and, decades of sociological, ontological, developmental psychology and research that this identity issue is a real thing. It's been there all this time throughout history, but nobody's been talking about it. And now they're all coming out like it's so healthy, I think. And they're just trying to find out who they are, and they're wanting to go to community. They want to be fed. They want to be affirmed. And they're just not welcome in the doors of the churches unless they absolutely conform to quote unquote God's standards. And that was one of the things for my older children. They're like, that's not like, what kind of God would not open the doors to everyone as a full participant? And why do we have these policies in place against LGBTQ? Why are all these, why all this racial disparity in the early, doctrinal formation of the church? Like, there's so much there that everyone just kind of wants to quiet, like, be like us, do what we tell you, give us, tithes, and we'll build more buildings and temples, and we'll, it's like, well, I
yeah.
just keep going back to when Christ said, feed my sheep. Like, who are the sheep? The black sheep are the sheep.
All right,
And
so
we're all.
Cherie, I mean, I love talking to you about this, and I'm gonna hopefully beg a few more minutes of your time because we've explored so much here, and I hope that I know, dear listener, you're getting a lot out of this as I am. But uh, so we have to feel it. It's kind of what I'm getting, right? Like there, it comes back to that. You feel it to heal it, right? Like we have to feel it to heal it.
Yeah.
What do we, for someone who's like, oh yeah, you're right. I got some rage in me. I got some sacred rage in me. I've got some righteous indignation for whatever it is in your life. Any words of where to go with that? Like where to start, what to do?
Yeah, good question. So I actually had a conversation with a dear friend who went through one of my programs about she'd just woken up that her marriage is super toxic and her husband's a narcissist, and she's been married to him for like 15 years or something like that. And that's kind of her same question, what you just asked me, right? When you wake up to I'm being oppressed, I'm being suppressed, the natural outgrowth of that is depressed.
Mm.
So many people want to treat the depression, but they don't want to treat what's causing the oppression and suppression. So the first thing I tell people is like, don't judge your feelings. They're very valid. They're very, validating. It's
Mm-hmm.
validating to bounce them off someone. I had to not think that I'm crazy. I had to ground myself into people that I respect, who see me for me,
Mm-hmm.
who don't see me as a conformist, who don't see me as somebody who's just going along with the program as that as my identity, but they truly love me for me, not my choices, not my beliefs, but they love me. So you have to find those people. You can find a therapist like that, or an energy facilitator, energy healing facilitator. You can find communities online who are going to be affirming of your dark, I call it the dark night of the soul. I'm not the only one that calls it that, but we're seeing massive amounts of people now. It's almost mass consciousness that we're going to be all going through this dark night of the soul. So this is a good time to go through it now instead of when it hits pandemonium level, like people being like, we've been lied to, we've been this, we've been that. So attach to people who see you for you,
Mm.
that you can actually bounce these things off of. I had to go to people outside of the bubble that I was raised in, and they were like astounded at what I was led to believe as truth. And that was affirming to me, not because they felt like they were heretics that were trying to take me off the path, but like they just honored me in the questioning of things and the unraveling of my identity that I'd built all these decades, and trying to be this perfect, Mormon woman, perfect daughter of God. And so, yeah, so find those people, listen to podcasts that are doing that for you, and just line up with people who affirm who you actually are.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think that idea of don't judge your feelings is so huge. Like that, what Cherie is saying is loving acceptance, right? Like that's a practice. That's a really deep practice, like loving acceptance that you can start. It can feel weird and uncomfortable, and you can start it and find the people who see you. And that's exactly what we need. And don't keep going. Persistence, lots of persistence, dear listener.
Yeah.
Cherie, obviously we like talked for like 3 hours, I think. Um, where can people find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah. So if you go to standspeakshine.com, standspeakshine.com, that's, I do have CherieBurton.com, but standspeakshine.com has like freebies. I have a new wisdom kit for women that helps them get into stillness, all kinds of programs, and wherever your needs are. But you can also find my podcast there, Women Seeking Wholeness. So, I'm always trying to be a resource and a guide, not someone who hands people a set of deliverable things to believe.
Amen. Amen. Amen to the questioners. Yes. Yes. This
Yes.
has been so wonderful and fascinating. Thank you, Cherie, so much for sharing your time and for sharing your story here. I know that it's going to have some ripple effects that we'll never even know, but I appreciate your presence so much.
Thank you, Hunter, and I appreciate yours as well. Thank you for having me.
Catch new episodes of the Mindful Mama podcast and other free resources, including the Mindful Mom Guide at mindfulmamamentor.com. You can listen to every back catalog episode, including interviews with Dr. Dan Siegel, Ianla Van Zant, Sharon Salzberg, and get meditations, join our private Facebook group, and more. Go to mindfulmamamentor.com now. I'll see you there.